Ladies and gentlemen, what a privilege it is to be back after a very dramatic few days in F1 for another episode of Formula 1 for Fummies. Now, if you didn't follow all the drama after the finish of the Canadian Grand Prix, go and listen to my latest episode on the TF1 podcast where I explain exactly why the whole F1 community is clutching at their pearls with big fat tears of frustration rolling down their cheeks. But as you know, this podcast is all about educating the masses to ensure that next time you can also clutch your own set of pearls with us. So if you listened last week, you'll remember that I discussed the current top 3 teams in F1. So today we will be discussing the rest, the also-rans, the bottom feeders, the scum class, or better known as the Formula 1.5 teams. Now, firstly, I'll have to admit the other teams aren't that much worse than Red Bull, Mercedes or Ferrari, so I was probably a bit mean by calling them the scum class, but I mean, to put that into perspective, no other team other than obviously Red Bull, Mercedes or Ferrari has won a race since 2013, so that's 6 years ago, when Kimi Raikkonen won the Australian Grand Prix in his Lotus Renault, which was incidentally the first race of the 2013 season. So yeah, just for a bit of perspective. Secondly, I would then like to explain the F Formula 1.5 name, and it's quite simple. The top 3 are the Formula 1 teams, with the rest effectively falling into their own formula somewhere between 1 and 2. The number 1.5 just seemed the most convenient. Quite easy, relatively simple. So when I speak about the Formula 1.5 teams in future, you know who I'm talking about. Now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let me tell you a bit about the other teams in F1. I'll go through them in order of where they are currently sitting in the championship. So then firstly, I'll start with McLaren Renault, previously known as McLaren Honda, previously known as McLaren Mercedes. So the message you can take out of what I've just said is that McLaren is quite slutty when it comes to their engines recently, where they used to run a Mercedes engine in the back, then decided no, they want their own bespoke engine manufacturer and brought Honda along. Now, their years with Honda was an absolute disaster, so then they decided no, actually they can't even deal with this disappointment anymore, they're going to move over to Renault. So they've been running the Renault engine now for the past year and a bit, and they are definitely on the comeback path. So McLaren was one of those legendary Formula 1 teams who have won many races, many world titles. They are really one of the synonymous names with the sport, and recently they've just had a massively bad couple of years, stemming all the way from 2012, which was sort of their last decently good season for them, where they won a few races. Now, as I mentioned, they used to be at the top of the sport for decades, up until 2012, and management problems and just poor decisions in terms of, the direction of the car and the direction of the team led to their downfall. So their current drivers are Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris. They are both super young, super quick, super talented, and we're all very excited to see if they can pull this McLaren team back to the top where it belongs. So the team principal is Gilles de Ferran. So he's basically the principal running the team. He's brand new. He just recently joined, and they hired him since he was very successful in kickstarting the Porsche World Endurance Championship racing team that's where that program has now ended. So yeah, he's just come off of a very successful stint at Porsche and is now being brought in to revitalize McLaren as well. So I mean, I'm now going to give you a list of famous drivers that have previously driven for McLaren, and just to give you an idea, so Lewis Hamilton won his first championship with them, Jenson Button drove for them, Fernando Alonso drove for them, Kimi Raikkonen drove for them, Ayrton Senna, the legend, drove for them, Alain Prost, another legend, drove for them, Niki Lauda, I've mentioned him a few times as well, drove for them. So many famous world championship drivers that have driven for McLaren, and that have many of them winning championships with McLaren as well. So I think all of us want to see McLaren back at the top, and this year it does seem that they are, at least on the comeback path, and things are improving for them. So very exciting indeed. The next team I want to speak about is Renault. So Renault is one of the other works teams along with Mercedes and Ferrari. So they are both have a chassis, or they build their own cars, and then obviously build their own engines. And this is also a team on the comeback. So this has also been a team that's been relatively successful in the past, most notably with Fernando Alonso, where they won the Drivers' and the Constructors' World Championship with him in 2005 and 2006. So yeah, I mean, a very, very famous team. Also, wanting to get back to their glory days. I mean, they have a very impressive driver lineup in Nico Hülkenberg and Daniel Ricciardo. Where, I mean, Daniel Ricciardo was a brilliant driver for Red Bull. He's won a few races. And if anyone's listened to, either this podcast or my TF1 podcast, you'll know that I rate Nico Hülkenberg very highly. I think he's a very underrated driver and is extremely talented. The team principal for Renault is a man called Cyril Abiteboul. And again, if you listen to TF1, I speak about him quite a lot. I quite like, Cyril Abiteboul. And I think the best way to describe him is he's very French. Take that in any way that you want. So I mentioned Fernando Alonso previously. He's probably the most famous driver that have driven for Renault. But Kimi Räikkönen was also a Renault driver for a bit before he came back to Ferrari. Okay, the next team in my list is Team Racing Point. They were previously known as Force India, and then they ran into financial difficulties due to, I guess, the mismanagement of their previous owner. And I guess I need to sigh here again, because they were bought out by a businessman called Lawrence Stroll. Now, if the name Stroll does sound familiar, it's because the name Stroll has popped up before in the Formula 1 for Fummies series, since his son, Lance Stroll, is one of the drivers for Team Racing Point now. Isn't that just too convenient? Now, Mr. Lawrence Stroll has a bit of a track record when it comes to, let's say, buying his way into the sport, where Lawrence was surprisingly a major financial backer for the Williams team previously. And guess who was driving for Williams during that period? It was Lance Stroll. So, Lance Stroll, I guess I'm being slightly mean. He has here and there shown some talent and some capability, but I don't know. I just find the whole idea of your dad buying your way into a sport a bit nauseating. Other people might not mind it. I personally don't like it at all. But in any case, so Lance's teammate is Sergio Perez, a very, very experienced and competent driver that has, gotten a few podiums with Force India previously. And yeah, very, very capable and a very good driver overall. Racing Point's team principal is called Otmar Safnauer. He, strangely enough, has an American accent, so I actually don't know exactly where he is from, because his name doesn't sound English or American at all, but I guess it's one of those many mysteries that Formula 1 presents us with on a daily basis. Cool, the next team is called Scuderia Toro Rosso, and if you translate that into English, it means Team Red Bull. Now, this is no coincidence, folks. You'll be surprised to know that this is basically the baby Red Bull team and is usually used as a feeder team for the Red Bull Racing Development Program. So I spoke a bit about that in the previous episode, where, it's basically a program that, assists young drivers through the ranks to finally end up in the Red Bull car if they are good enough. So all of the young promising Red Bull drivers first drove for this team. So drivers like Verstappen, drivers like Carlos Sainz, obviously Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo, all of them drove for Toro Rosso in the past. So the current drivers are Daniel Kvyat and Alex Albon. Albon, this is the first time that he's driving for the Toro Rosso team. But interestingly, it's the third time that Daniel Kvyat is driving for the Toro Rosso team since, a while back, I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, he drove for Toro Rosso, after which he was then upgraded to the Red Bull team in 2015, and then halfway through the 2016 season, Daniel Kvyat was fired and replaced with Max Verstappen, Kvyat then being relegated back to the Toro Rosso team and drove for them up until the end of that year, after which he was promptly fired. But, Red Bull ran into a bit of trouble after Daniel Ricciardo decided not to be in the Red Bull team anymore, and they had to basically bump up Pierre Gasly, who used to drive for Toro Rosso last year, and, pull Daniel Kvyat back up into the team. Incidentally, Kvyat has done a very good job so far this season, so good for him for using his third opportunity. And the team principal of the Toro Rosso team is Franz Tost. Okay, so the next team is Haas. It's called the team Haas. So now, if you are from South Africa like I am and can speak Afrikaans, Haas means rabbit. So obviously for me, I find the name hilarious because it's basically Team Rabbit in my mother tongue. But, I digress. Haas is a customer team. Ferrari supplies their engines for them. It's an American team, interestingly enough. And it's a relatively new team. And, they've actually done quite well for a team so new in the sport. But they are very reliant on Ferrari. And they borrow a lot of their components from them, and buy a lot of the components from them, and able to basically cut down on costs and to prevent too much development time. So therefore, some of the teams are unhappy with this arrangement, and they do feel that Ferrari is effectively entering two teams, along with the Alfa Romeo team as well. So their drivers are Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen, both of them very fast on their day. Roman Grosjean is just extremely inconsistent and, can just get into the strangest accidents in his car. Yeah, a bit of a loose cannon, while Kevin Magnussen is an angry, angry man on the racetrack. And, not many people like him. But actually this year so far, he's been doing quite a good job. So, good on you, Kevin. Good on you. The team principal is Günther Steiner. Is a very angry German with a massive potty mouth. He's probably the most entertaining man on the grid, so watch out for any interviews with him. It's bound to be entertaining. Cool. Now, the second to last team I want to talk about is called Alfa Romeo Racing. They were previously known as Alfa Romeo Sauber, and before that just as the Sauber team. So Sauber is similar to Williams, was sort of a works team started by a man called Peter Sauber, but in the meantime, it's now been bought out by Alfa Romeo. It's the first team that the team is exclusively running with the name Alfa Romeo, and they're similar to Toro Rosso as a junior team for Ferrari. To give an example, Charles Leclerc drove for them last year until he was upgraded into the Ferrari seat for this year. So the drivers in the Sauber team, the Alfa Romeo team is Kimi Raikkonen. And to be honest, Kimi Raikkonen drove for Ferrari up until last year. They basically swapped him and Leclerc around. And, since he's about 40 years old at the moment, his last 2 years at Alfa Romeo is just an elaborate and extravagant retirement package, which I guess is nice for him. And then the other driver is Antonio Giovinazzi, a young and promising Italian that this year so far has not really lived up to his potential. The team principal is Fred Vasseur, a very competent and clever man that has done really good things with the team recently. So, big respect to him. And then lastly, poor Fummies, we need to talk about Williams. Williams. A once great team, now right at the bottom of the pack. So this is the team started decades ago by Frank Williams, a British man. And this is a team with an incredible racing history, and probably along with McLaren, they were the most successful non-works or manufacturer team in history. Things have just been steadily going downhill over the last 20 years. They just haven't had a championship winning car in such a long time. Their drivers for this year is George Russell, and then also partnered with Robert Kubica. Some famous past drivers for them is Ayrton Senna, what a legend, Nigel Mansell, Jenson Button and Nico Rosberg, the world champion with Mercedes. And we really do hope that we will be able to see Williams back in the thick of things, since, to be honest, even this year it's been even worse. They've been competing in their own category. I think we need to call it Formula 1.75. So, there you go. I've now taken you through the Formula 1 teams, the Formula 1.5 teams, and then the Formula 1.75 team right at the end. So, Fummies, I hope that you now know a bit more about each of the teams participating and that you'll be able to spot all of them during the French Grand Prix in a week and a half's time. As I've mentioned in the previous episodes, please go and subscribe, rate and comment on whichever platform you listen on. If you have any specific questions or topics that you would like me to cover, leave a comment and I can try and see where I can fit it in. We are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Stitcher, and many more. Please also listen and subscribe to the TF1 show, my main podcast, if you're interested in the more intricate details of Formula One. Then finally, I'm on Twitter as @TF1show and on Instagram as @TheTF1show. Please connect with me. I'm always keen for a chat on Formula One. I'll see you next time. Bye.